Julian Whittaker wasn't expecting the past to call him on a Tuesday night. But there it was, Ethan's name glowing on his phone, his voice on speaker carrying that familiar blend of nostalgia and insistence. "Come on, Lily Julian," Ethan said, half laughing, half pushing. "You owe me. Remember how I let you copy half my chemistry final? This is me collecting." Julian leaned back in his leather chair, letting the city lights of Aurora shimmer beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Being CEO of a billion-dollar tech firm had its burdens, and this, surprise guilt trips from the past, was apparently one of them. "It's just one night," Ethan added. "One reunion." Julian sighed, scrolling through the yearbook photos Ethan had sent earlier. His eyes paused on a familiar name he hadn't thought about in years. "Lily Park?" he asked. "I didn't even know her." "No," Ethan said quietly, "but you saw her. We all did, and you chose to look away." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was sharp, the kind that slides in between ribs. Julian tapped the screen, stopping at one photo. Lily in her senior year. Big glasses, metal braces, a gaze that always seemed fixed on the floor. She looked like someone who had spent years perfecting the art of being invisible. "She's a surgeon now," Ethan added, his voice softer. "Pediatric reconstruction. Can you believe that?" The girl everyone forgot grew up and started healing children. Julian felt the weight of something he couldn't quite name. Regret, maybe. Not for what he did, but for what he hadn't done. "We were just kids," he murmured. "Clueless and stupid." "Exactly," Ethan said. "So now that you're not a kid anymore, do something different. Invite her. Show her that not everyone from those days stayed the same." Julian stared at the stock ticker running on his screen, the green and red numbers meaningless for once. "She won't say yes." "Maybe not," Ethan said. "But maybe that's not the point." There was a pause, longer this time. Then Julian asked, "Why does this matter to you?" Ethan hesitated before answering. "Because I used to be the kid no one believed in either, and someone once gave me a chance to be more than that. I think she deserves that too." Julian didn't reply right away. He simply opened his calendar. 6 weeks until the Eastfield High 10-year reunion. "Fine, I'll send the message," he said at last. "But if she says no, I'm blaming you." Ethan laughed, and it sounded like relief. "Deal. Her info's on the alumni site. Thanks, Jules." When the call ended, Julian sat in the quiet for a moment longer than necessary. Then, almost reluctantly, he opened his browser. It didn't take long to find her. Dr. Lily Park, Havenbrook Children's Medical Center. Her photo was professional but cautious. White coat, gentle eyes behind those same glasses, though thinner now. She looked older, of course, but not hardened. There was something still soft in her expression. Julian hovered over the keyboard. "Dear Dr. Park, my name is Julian Whittaker. I graduated from Eastfield High in 2015. You may not remember me, but I'm writing to invite you to our upcoming 10-year reunion. I'd be honored if you'd consider attending as my guest." He read it once, then, without hesitation, deleted the entire message. Julian stared at the blinking cursor. His first draft felt stiff, like a corporate memo rather than a message to someone he hadn't spoken to in 10 years. He deleted the whole thing and tried again. "Lily," Ethan suggested, "I reach out to you about the Eastfield High reunion." He paused, still too formal, still not right. He sighed, ran a hand through his hair and started over. A buzz from the intercom cut through the silence. "Mr. Whittaker, your 2 o'clock is here." "Give me 5 minutes," he replied, not taking his eyes off the screen. He inhaled slowly, then typed, this time without overthinking. "Hi Lily, my name's Julian Whittaker. We were at Eastfield High together. I'll admit, I'm not exactly sure how to write this. Ethan suggested I invite you to our 10-year reunion, but even as I type, it feels presumptuous. We didn't talk much back then. In truth, I was part of a crowd that probably made things harder for you, even if it was just by staying silent. I'm not reaching out of guilt or some old obligation. The truth is, I've heard about the incredible work you're doing, and I'd really like the chance to hear your story, if you're willing to share it. If not, I understand completely. Just let me know, and I won't bother you again." Before doubt could take over, he hit send. Later that afternoon, as his meeting droned on, a notification appeared quietly at the top of his phone. New email from Dr. Lily Park. His pulse ticked up. It had been a long time since something as small as an email made his hands tremble. On the other side of the country, Dr. Lily Park stood in the middle of a brightly lit operating room, steady and composed. Her hands worked with surgical precision, each motion calculated, confident. Another cleft palate reconstruction. Another small face. Another life subtly changed. The anesthesiologist noted a slight shift in vitals. Expected at this point, Lily said calmly. Let's continue. This was her world, the one where she didn't have to explain herself. Here, she wasn't the quiet girl from high school or the target of teenage cruelty. She was simply Dr. Park, trusted, capable, respected. And yet, somewhere behind her composed exterior, a ripple of unease stirred. It had started that morning, when she opened an unexpected email from Julian Whitaker. She hadn't answered. 2 hours later, the surgery wrapped. Another success. She peeled off her gloves, rolling her shoulders to release the weight of the procedure. Another flawless job, said Dr. Lisa Wong, her mentor, as they scrubbed out. No wonder the board wants you leading the new craniofacial center. Lily offered a tired smile. Just doing my part. Lisa leaned against the sink, softening her tone. They were especially impressed by your push for psychological care alongside the surgeries. Not many doctors think about that. It comes from experience, Lily said quietly, too quietly. She instantly regretted it. Lisa gave her a knowing look. This wouldn't have anything to do with your high school reunion, would it? I heard some of the nurses talking. Angela's planning to go. Lily dried her hands more forcefully than necessary. I got an email this morning, she admitted, from Julian Whitaker. Lisa raised an eyebrow. The tech guy? Lily nodded. Apparently he's inviting me to the reunion. Lisa's voice softened. Isn't he the one in the news lately? Something about groundbreaking software for surgical planning? That's him. Her phone buzzed again. The unread email still waited, like a door she wasn't sure she wanted to open. This mattered more than she wanted to admit. She sank into the nearest chair, the edges of the past brushing up against the present. The break room couch creaked softly as Lily sank into it, the fatigue of the day finally catching up with her. She closed her eyes, allowing herself a moment, just one, to feel the weight of what that email had stirred. He was one of the golden ones, wasn't he? She murmured. Julian Whitaker. Always surrounded, always admired, never cruel, but never kind either. Her voice drifted off as old memories tiptoed back. Whispered jokes in crowded hallways. Suppressed laughter when she walked past. The echo of lockers slamming shut behind her back. Dr. Lisa Wong settled beside her, a gentle presence. And now he's playing Prince Charming, is he? Sounds like Ethan's the one pulling the strings. He said as much, Lily replied, glancing down at her phone again. Ethan encouraged him. Lisa's expression shifted. Wasn't Ethan the one who led that awful chant at graduation? The ugly duckling thing? Lily nodded slowly. That's him. She opened the email again, her eyes scanning Julian's words. There was something in them, something unpolished and unexpectedly sincere. It caught her off guard, coming from someone so used to being on top of the world. At least he was honest, she whispered. Lisa looked at her with quiet seriousness. But you don't owe them anything, Lily. You know that, right? Lily rose, pacing the small room, her thoughts tangled between anger and longing. I'm not thinking of going for them, she said. I'm thinking of going for me. To prove something? Lisa asked gently. Lily turned to the window, the Boston skyline reflecting dimly in the glass. To prove I've grown past that girl who flinched when people laughed, she said. She adjusted her glasses, a habit she never managed to shake. But I'm not sure I'm ready to stand under that kind of light again. Her phone buzzed. Another surgical consult. Life moved forward whether or not the past came knocking. Sleep on it, Lisa said, standing. You don't have to decide right now. As Lily moved through her afternoon rounds, her mind spun in quiet motion. She thought of the custom masks they used in craniofacial reconstruction, tools that allowed patients to imagine themselves whole again, without fear or shame. 4 times she tried writing a response. 4 times she deleted every word. Finally, in a lull between patient visits, she let her fingers speak for her. Julian, I appreciate your honesty, especially regarding Ethan's involvement. Just so you know, I've chosen to stay away from reunions for very clear reasons. That said, I'll attend. But on one condition, I intend to wear a masquerade mask for the entire evening. I'll decide when or if I take it off. If that makes you uncomfortable, I understand completely. Lily. She hit send before doubt could creep in. Moments later, she was paged for an emergency trauma consult. Hours passed in a blur. It wasn't until nearly midnight, while wrapping up her notes, that she saw the reply waiting on her screen. Fascinating idea. Would you consider discussing it over coffee? Lily stared at the message, then at her own reflection in the darkened glass of her office window. The same glasses, the same smile, still guarded, the same braces, again after a second round in her 20s. But the eyes behind the lenses, those had changed. She began to type. Tomorrow, 7 a.m., Blue Bottle Cafe on Congress Street, before my first surgery. His answer came within seconds. I'll be there. Meanwhile, far across the city, Ethan Barnes sat hunched over his laptop for the 10th time that evening, refreshing Julian's social profile, searching for any hint of a reply. Nothing. You're spiraling, his wife Rachel said gently, placing a steaming mug of tea beside him. I can't help it, Ethan muttered, raking a hand through his prematurely graying hair. At 32, the lines around his eyes had deepened more than they should have. This has to work. Rachel perched on the arm of his chair, resting a hand on his shoulder. You've never told me why this matters so much. Ethan closed the laptop slowly, the screen fading to black. Do you remember that old box of forgotten things I found in the attic? He said, his voice almost too soft to hear. It was during the move, Ethan said, reaching for his tea. The week I barely spoke, you remember? Rachel nodded gently, watching as he opened the old notebook on his lap, faded cover, corners curled. I found this, he murmured, my senior year notebook, full of things we planned to do to Lily. Rachel's face changed. Ethan? I was the one behind it, he confessed, the words jagged as they left his mouth. We wanted to humiliate her. One last time. Make sure no one forgot what we thought she was. He stared at the notebook like it might still hurt someone even now. But you didn't go through with it, Rachel said. I backed out at the very last minute, but I never apologized. I never tried to make it right. His thumb hovered over his phone, as if expecting a message that wouldn't come. She's a pediatric surgeon now, he added softly. Specializes in reconstructive surgery for kids. Rachel tilted her head. That feels fitting. What do you mean? She fixes what others once mocked, the kind of scars no one else knows how to heal. Just then, Ethan's phone vibrated. Julian, meeting Lily for coffee tomorrow. Wish me luck. Ethan smiled faintly, typing his reply without delay. Make it count. Julian responded almost instantly. I still don't understand why this means so much to you. Ethan started and erased a dozen responses before settling on. Believe me when I say, this isn't about me. Rachel had been reading over his shoulder. You haven't told him the full story, have you? No, Ethan admitted. I haven't told anyone. He hesitated, then continued. I've been donating to her department for years. Anonymously, I read every paper she publishes, every photo of her receiving an award. It reminds me of who we were back then, and how little she deserved what we gave her. Rachel placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Maybe it's time she knew. Ethan shook his head. This isn't about forgiveness. I'm not looking for closure. I just want to give her the night we tried to take away. A new notification blinked onto his screen, this time from the Alumni Association. Final head count needed for the gala. RSVP deadline approaching. Rachel tilted her head. You're still trying to play matchmaker. No, Ethan said firmly. I'm not matching them. I'm giving them a moment they were both denied. He pulled up Lily's hospital profile, her accolades and titles listed beside a calm, confident photo. She should walk into that ballroom beside someone who truly sees her. And if it doesn't go the way you hope? Rachel asked quietly. Ethan glanced down at the fireplace, where the notebook now existed only as ash. Then I'll tell her everything. The plan, the donations, all of it. Rachel touched his hand. You're a good man, Ethan Barnes. He looked up, not smiling. I'm trying to become one. Another message from Julian appeared. Any idea how she takes her coffee? Ethan chuckled, the sound light for the first time that night. Some things, he typed back, you're meant to discover for yourself. At 6:55 a.m., the Blue Bottle Cafe on Congress Street was nearly empty. Julian stepped inside, the warmth of the place wrapping around him like a second skin. He approached the counter, uncertain. After a long pause, he ordered 2 of everything that looked remotely breakfast-like. The barista raised an eyebrow but said nothing as the trays filled. At exactly 7 a.m., The door opened with a soft chime. Lily Park stepped in, her winter coat draped over surgical scrubs, her hair neatly pulled back. She paused, eyes scanning the room until they landed on him. Julian stood. "You ordered enough food for an entire operating team," she remarked, settling into the seat across from him. He smiled, nervous but genuine. "I wasn't sure what you liked." Julian gently nudged the plate of pastries toward the center of the table. "I wasn't sure about your preferences," he said. "So I brought a bit of everything." Lily glanced at the selection, then reached for a plain croissant. "I used to bring my own lunch in high school," she said casually. The cafeteria food wasn't exactly brace-friendly. She took a bite and offered a small smile. "Still have them, actually. Phase 2, adult orthodontics." Julian tried not to stare at the silver brackets lining her teeth. They look polished. Elegant, actually. "There's no need to compliment my braces," she said with a soft laugh, sipping her coffee. There was a brief pause, then she met his eyes. "Let's talk about the email." Julian shifted in his seat, his expression more serious now. "About Tom, I want to be clear, I'm not here because of him." "I'm not interested in Tom's motivations," Lily interrupted, calm but direct. "I'm interested in yours. Why did you agree to this?" He thought for a moment before answering. "Honestly, at first it was because of Tom's persistence. He has a way of nudging people." "And then," she pressed. Julian hesitated, then admitted, "Then I looked you up. Read your work. Pediatric reconstructive surgery. It's extraordinary, Lily." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she broke her croissant into tiny pieces, her fingers methodical. "Is this the part where you say beauty is on the inside?" she asked dryly. "No," Julian replied gently. "This is the part where I ask about your idea for the masquerade." He leaned in slightly, voice low. "Why the mask?" "Because I want one night where people have to speak to me before they judge me," she said simply. "In your world, tech, algorithms, you understand the importance of controlling variables." Julian blinked. "So this is a social experiment?" "More like self-preservation," she said, not breaking eye contact. He considered her words carefully. "That's fair, but if we're doing this, I think we need a few ground rules." Lily pulled her phone from her coat pocket and glanced at the time. "I have a surgery in 40 minutes. Let's make it quick." Julian nodded. "Rule 1, she said firmly. "No one can know who I am at the ball. Complete anonymity." "Agreed." "Rule 2, don't hover in the shadows all night." He smirked. "Understood." "Rule 3, no photos. If there are photographers, I'm gone before the masks come off." "Got it." She looked up again. "Rule 4, if anyone asks, we reconnected at a med tech conference last month. I actually attended one in Boston, so technically, it's not a lie." Julian raised an eyebrow. "You really thought this through?" "I'm a surgeon," she said, rising from her seat. "I plan everything." She gathered her bag, then paused, her voice softer. "This isn't a romantic fairy tale, Julian. I'm not your redemption arc." "Of course not," he said, rising with her. "But what is it then?" She paused at the door, hand resting on the frame. Two people facing the past on their own terms. Then she looked back just briefly. "Oh, and next time, skip the fancy stuff. A plain croissant and black coffee will do. Some of us still prefer simplicity." With that, she disappeared into the early morning crowd. Julian stared at the untouched pastries, then glanced at his phone. A message from Ethan blinked on the screen. "How'd it go?" He typed back. She said yes. "But this is already bigger than us," Ethan replied in seconds. "Then it's time you both learned how to swim." 2 weeks later, Julian and Lily sat across from one another again. This time in a quieter cafe, long after the lunch rush had passed. The table between them was scattered with medical journals and printed research articles. The conversation was no longer about the past, it was about possibility. "These masks are ridiculous," Lily said, flicking through photos of a Venetian-themed gala on her tablet. "They barely cover anything at all." Across the table, Julian pretended to read a medical journal, though the words blurred past his focus. "Would you prefer something more Phantom of the Opera?" he asked, half joking. "I'm thinking more refined than theatrical," she replied. With a few taps, she turned the screen toward him. "Something like this." The design was breathtaking. An ornate creation of filigree metalwork and shimmering stones, cascading from the forehead to the cheekbones like a sculpted waterfall of light. Julian raised an eyebrow. "That looks expensive." "I can manage," Lily said, a note of sharpness in her tone. Surgeons don't exactly live off ramen. He raised his hands in surrender. I didn't mean it that way. I know, she softened, but this isn't about money, it's about something else. Power. Julian set the journal aside. Can I ask you something? That depends, she replied, folding her arms. What kind of question? Why did you say yes? Lily's spoon circled slowly through her coffee. You could have ignored me, Julian added. Deleted the message. Gone on with your life. She looked up, her voice quieter now. Do you know what I tell my patients before reconstructive surgery? She asked. He shook his head. I tell them, this won't change who you are. It just helps the world see you more clearly. Her eyes met his, calm, unwavering. I'm not hiding behind a mask, Julian. I'm forcing people to look at me, really look, maybe for the first time. Julian felt the weight of that, the truth of it landing with more force than he expected. And what am I supposed to see? He asked gently. That's entirely up to you, she said, gathering the scattered journals into a neat stack. But first, we need practice. Practice? He echoed. Showing up in public together. Walking, talking, making it look natural. Julian leaned back, arms crossed. And your prescription for that? Dinner. Somewhere casual. Small talk. Eye contact. 4 weeks isn't a long time to build history. She opened her calendar. Thursday evening. I'm free. Are you? Julian hesitated only a second. Thursday works. Somewhere quiet. No chance of running into anyone from Eastfield High. There's a cozy little Italian place in Cambridge, he offered. Low light, great food, no high school ghosts. Perfect, she said, standing. Oh, and Julian. He looked up. No tailored suits. Dress for comfort, not for battle. This isn't a show. It has to feel real. As she left, Julian watched her go, struck by the sudden awareness that he'd just agreed to rehearse a romance, one built on masks, carefully managed appearances, and the hope that pretending could lead to something true. His phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. Any updates? Julian glanced at the stack of medical journals Lily had left behind, their margins filled with her notes, her name on every published cover. He typed, "It's complicated." Ethan's reply came immediately. "Isn't that the point?" Julian stared at the screen, then turned his gaze to the sketch of Lily's mask resting on the table. Elegant, intricate, deliberate, complicated didn't even begin to cover it. At the edge of the city, in a sunlit workshop tucked behind ivy-covered walls, an elderly woman examined the drawing through delicate, half-moon glasses. "In 3 weeks?" Eleanor asked, lifting her eyes to Lily. "I know it's short notice," Lily said, offering the tablet with the design. But Eleanor's soft chuckle interrupted her. She took the tablet carefully in both hands, eyes gleaming with curiosity. "My dear," she said, "this isn't just a mask. This is a declaration." "It'll take at least 2 weeks just for the metalwork," Eleanor said, examining the sketch in her hands. A quiet weight pressed against Lily's chest. "I can pay extra if that helps." "Sit," the older woman said gently, motioning toward a wooden stool near her workbench. They were deep in Boston's North End, in a tucked-away studio that smelled of paint, aged wood, and metal polish. Around them, masks in every stage of becoming rested like sleeping creatures. Some unfinished, some already whispering stories through gold filigree and brushed feathers. "Tell me," Eleanor said, "why this mask matters." Lily perched on the edge of the stool, hesitant. "It's complicated. It's not just a party." Eleanor studied the design again. "This isn't a costume, it's armor." "Is that a bad thing?" Lily asked. Eleanor gave a half-smile. "Depends on the war you're fighting." She set the tablet aside and picked up a measuring tape, stepping close. "Stay still." Lily obeyed as Eleanor took precise measurements of her face, across the brow, along the cheekbones, over the bridge of her nose. Lily's gaze wandered to the studio walls, photos of stage performers, Venetian festivals, intricate saris paired with hand-forged masks. "How long have you been doing this?" "Since I was 16, Eleanor replied. "Started in Venice. My father taught me. Every mask tells a story." "And what story does mine tell?" Lily asked. Eleanor paused, eyes glinting. "A reunion of classmates. That's the most treacherous theater of all." Lily laughed softly, nervously. "It's not quite like that." "No?" Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Then why create a mask that hides everything but your eyes?" Lily's hand instinctively brushed her braces, a small, almost invisible flicker of old embarrassment. "I want them to see me differently." "Or maybe," Eleanor said, closing her notebook, "you want to see them differently." Lily blinked. "What do you mean?" Behind a mask, you can observe the world without being observed. You can see who people really are, those who once judged you. But, she warned, picking up a half-finished mask from the bench, be careful. Sometimes a mask becomes a prison. If you forget, you're allowed to take it off. Lily said nothing, watching as Eleanor began to sketch subtle changes to the design. Can it really be done in 3 weeks? She asked. For the right story? Eleanor smiled. I'll make it real. She looked up. But first, we must talk about the eyes, the one thing no mask can hide. Are you ready for people to truly see them? Lily thought of Julian, of the way he looked at her across the cafe table, not with curiosity or pity, but with something gentler. Genuine interest, respect. I think I finally am, she said. Good. Eleanor nodded. Come back next week for the fitting. As Lily gathered her coat, Eleanor added, one more thing. Show me a photo of the dress. The mask should enhance, not overpower. On her walk back to the car, Lily's phone buzzed. Julian. Found the perfect spot for Thursday. Hope it's casual enough. Attached was a photo of a charming, tucked-away Italian eatery. Ivy on the walls, candlelight in the windows. She smiled. He was trying. That mattered. Lily, looks great. Just remember, no suits, he replied instantly. Jeans. I promise. She hesitated for a moment, then typed, the mask will be ready on time. His response was nearly immediate. I never doubted it. Truthfully, she had. And yet Eleanor's words echoed in her thoughts. A mask can become a prison if you forget you can take it off. She looked up at the winter sky. Who was she really protecting? Them or herself? Back in his office, Julian sat beneath the low hum of his desk lamp, his world bathed in the pale glow of a computer screen. Tabs crowded his browser. Research articles, medical journals, published studies, all by her. He wasn't reading for information anymore. He was searching for understanding. In the quiet of that late hour, he realized something. This was no longer about a reunion. It was becoming something much more difficult and far more honest. Julian sat quietly, staring at the evaluation data on the screen. Studies on the psychological impact of pediatric facial trauma. He wasn't just reading anymore. He was studying. That was when Rachel entered. You know, she said, pausing at the door with a smirk, most people just scroll through social media when they're procrastinating. Julian minimized the open browser tabs a beat too late. She's not on Facebook, he said, almost defensively. Rachel raised an eyebrow, approaching with a stack of contracts. I figured as much. She doesn't seem the type. She placed the paperwork on his desk, then leaned against the edge with casual curiosity. Are you going to tell me what's got you so fascinated, or do I have to guess? Julian hesitated. She works at that children's hospital we funded last year, he said. Specifically, the craniofacial unit. Rachel's eyes narrowed. The hospital, you mean? He nodded slowly. She's the chief surgeon at the Crawford Pediatric Surgical Center. Rachel blinked. The one named after you? I didn't know, he said quietly. I had no idea she worked there. Rachel pulled up the hospital's website on her tablet and turned it toward him. Her name, her title, her photo, all there. You gave them $20 million, Julian. Of course they named it after you. Julian leaned back in his chair, absorbing the realization. Does she know? He asked, almost to himself. You insisted on staying anonymous, Rachel reminded him. That was your thing. No spotlights, no speeches. He thought about that. Why he had always disliked recognition for writing checks. It had never sat right with him. He wasn't interested in applause. But this was different. His phone buzzed. Lily, Thursday's dinner will need to be moved. Emergency surgery. He replied instantly. Is everything okay? A 6-year-old with facial trauma. It might take several hours. Julian's eyes drifted to the hospital website. Her name, his name, the irony. Take all the time you need. What about Friday instead? Her response came quickly. Friday works. Thank you. He stared at the screen, then asked aloud, Is that who I am, Rachel? She looked up. What do you mean? Staying out of the spotlight, is that humility or fear? Rachel took a moment before answering. One is rooted in strength, she said softly, the other in hiding. Only you know which one's driving you. Just then, another notification. Lily, the mask is starting to take shape. The metalwork is beautiful. Julian replied. It's becoming something special. She answered. As are many things. He looked around at the tabs still open on his browser. All articles, case studies, and published work under her name. He had supported the building of that surgical center, never knowing she would one day fill it with life, precision, and hope. "Clear my Friday evening," he said. "Already done," Rachel replied, turning to go. Then, pausing at the door, she added, "Funny how the most meaningful connections are sometimes the ones we didn't expect." When she left, Julian opened one of Lily's papers. In facial reconstruction, success isn't defined by perfection, but by the restoration of function and the return of confidence. He stared at the words for a long time. All the ways people wore masks. All the ways they forgot to take them off. Meanwhile, at Valley High, Ethan Barnes sat in the quiet of his office, watching the same message light up on his phone. "Dinner rescheduled. She's performing urgent surgery." Headmistress Diana Chin tapped gently on the frame of his open door. "You still matchmaking?" she asked, a teasing glint in her eye. Ethan smiled faintly. "Not exactly." She stepped in and closed the door behind her. "Then what are you doing?" He gestured toward the chair across from his desk. "Do you remember Lily Park? Class of 2015. Diana's expression softened. "Oh, yes," she said. "I remember her. The girl everyone used to whisper about." Diana's voice faded, swallowed by the quiet that lingered between them. "Yes," Ethan said simply. "Her." He turned his laptop screen toward her, Lily's hospital profile open under the soft office lights. "She's a pediatric reconstructive surgeon now, one of the best." Diana leaned in, her eyes scanning the profile with a mix of surprise and admiration. "Incredible," she murmured. "But why are you showing me this?" "I arranged for her to attend the alumni ball with Julian Whitaker." She looked up sharply. "The tech mogul?" Ethan nodded, pacing slowly by the window that overlooked the very football field where so much of the cruelty had once taken place. "Back then," he said quietly, "my friends and I made her life unbearable. We didn't just ignore her. We mocked her. We made her feel like she didn't belong." "That was 10 years ago, Ethan." "Exactly," he said, pausing. "And I've carried it with me every single day since." Outside, students crossed the field, oblivious to the ghosts still wandering there. "I've followed her work from afar," he continued, "donated to her department anonymously, read every paper she's published. She doesn't know. She can't know. Not yet." Diana was quiet for a moment. "And Julian?" she finally asked. "He's not who he used to be," Ethan said. "Focused, disciplined, honest in his own quiet way, like her. They had dinner last week. They're meeting again tomorrow." Diana stood slowly. "Be careful, Ethan. You can't rewrite the past by orchestrating other people's futures." "I'm not trying to rewrite anything," he replied. "I'm just hoping to give her the one night we tried to take from her." He glanced at his phone. No new messages from Julian. Not yet. But in their exchanges, the masks had begun to fall, slowly. Naturally. As Diana turned to leave, she hesitated at the door. "You know what's ironic?" she said, looking back at him. "You're the one wearing the biggest mask of all." When she left, Ethan returned to his screen, scrolling through his donation history. Another anonymous payment was due next week, another piece of quiet penance. Just then, his phone buzzed. "Julian, just found out, my donation last year went to Lily's department. I didn't even realize." Ethan's heart skipped. "One secret still intact," he typed back. Funny how things fall into place. But as he stared at the long list of hidden contributions, a quiet thought crept in. Perhaps Diana was right. Perhaps I've worn the most elaborate disguise of all. Elsewhere, Julian stared at himself in the mirror, holding his phone in one hand as his video call with Lily loaded. She appeared on the screen, her gaze sharp. "That suit won't work," she said flatly. He blinked. "What's wrong with it?" "You look like you stepped out of a Forbes cover shoot," she replied. "This isn't a shareholders' gala. It's a reunion. Blend in." Julian looked down at the sleek tuxedo. "I thought we were aiming for elegance." "We are," she said, adjusting her laptop angle. "But you're coming off as the CEO of the universe. We need warmth, not Wall Street." He loosened his bow tie. "Suggestions?" "The charcoal suit you wore at dinner last week," she said. "More approachable, less Fortune 500. Julian smirked. "So you did notice?" "Of course I did," she replied, then added with a small smile. "We're building a story here. Let's make sure people believe it." Julian stepped away from the camera for only a moment, then reappeared in the charcoal suit she had recommended. "Well?" he asked. Lily gave a slow nod of approval. "Much better. Less boardroom. More human." She leaned down and lifted her own garment bag with quiet intent. "Care to see?" "Absolutely." She unzipped it to reveal a gown of midnight blue, sleek, understated, elegant. There were no sequins, no drama, just clean lines and quiet grace. It was a dress that didn't demand attention but commanded it anyway. Julian's breath caught. "It's perfect," he said softly. She zipped it back up with practiced ease. "Eleanor's delivering the mask tonight, final fitting. Are you nervous?" he asked. "About wearing armor to face the people who tried to break me?" She replied with a half laugh. "What reason would I have to be anxious?" Julian moved closer to the screen, his expression sincere. "We can still back out, Lily. It's not too late." "No." Her voice was steady. "This is something I have to do." She hesitated, then added softly, "Just hold my hand when we walk in." "I will," he promised, checking the time. "Speaking of Eleanor, I should let you go." She reached for the laptop to end the call, then paused. "Julian?" "Yes?" "Thank you for seeing me." The screen went dark. Lily sat for a moment, staring at her reflection in the dim glow of her laptop. Then came the soft buzz of a text. "Eleanor, come outside. Time to put on your armor." Lily stood, inhaled deeply, and descended the stairs with resolve. Tomorrow would change everything, for better or worse. Across the city, Julian changed out of his suit and into something more casual. His phone buzzed again. "Ethan, all set?" "As ready as we'll ever be," Julian replied. "Then good luck." "Take care of her, Julian." Julian looked at himself in the mirror, adjusting his collar. "I will." The Grand Plaza Hotel shimmered under the glow of chandeliers, its polished marble floors catching reflections like water. Outside, Lily sat silently in Julian's car, running her fingers over the mask Eleanor had crafted. Silver filigree, fine crystals, a design that shimmered like starlight. "Are you ready?" Julian asked gently. "No," she said, fastening the mask. She looked at her reflection in the visor mirror. "But we go in anyway." Inside, early guests mingled in the lobby, their laughter echoing off tall ceilings. Julian extended a hand. She took it without hesitation. The world melted for a moment, just two people, walking into memory together. At the ballroom entrance, Ethan stood behind a table with name tags and printed programs. His voice caught slightly. "Julian Whitaker and—" Lily took the blank tag silently. Julian gave her hand a gentle squeeze. The room had begun to fill. Familiar faces floated by. Ghosts from a past she'd long buried. Ashley Peters, whose whispers had sparked ridicule. Jason Roberts, who once mockingly asked her to prom. Time had touched them all, softening their edges. They looked older, perhaps even remorseful. Or maybe she was simply seeing them with different eyes. "Drink?" Julian offered. She nodded. As he turned to head toward the bar, a voice rang out across the room. "Julian Whitaker, is that really you?" Lily turned to see a woman gliding toward her. Confident. Radiant. Jennifer Mills. Jennifer stopped short when she saw Lily. "And who might you be?" she asked, brow arching. Lily's eyes sparkled behind the mask. She didn't need to smile. The mask carried her expression just fine. Julian returned just in time to hear Jennifer's next question. "Is this your date, Julian? She looks familiar. Have we met?" Lily's voice was calm, almost amused. "There's always something familiar about a person who doesn't try too hard to be seen." Jennifer narrowed her eyes. "There's something about you I can't quite place." Lily tilted her head slightly, mask catching the chandelier's light. "Then perhaps it's time you started looking closer." "I'm not from around here," Lily replied smoothly, just as Julian returned with 2 glasses of wine. "Jennifer?" He nodded politely, handing Lily her drink. "Always a pleasure. You won't believe the news about my new startup." Jennifer launched in, already halfway through her story, barely sparing a glance at Lily beside him. Lily listened silently, watching the woman's dramatic hand gestures and carefully practiced smiles. The same Jennifer who once ruled the high school social scene now seemed more rehearsed than radiant. Her laugh rang out, slightly too loud, slightly too forced. More classmates began to drift toward them. Julian handled the small talk with practiced ease, subtly shielding Lily from too much scrutiny. When addressed directly, she responded calmly, her voice steady beneath the mask of silver and light. "So," someone asked, "are you in the medical field too?" "I work in surgery," she said simply. "How did you two meet?" Julian smiled. "Medical tech conference in Boston." The lie slid easily into place, polished and believable. As the night wore on, Lily realized something unexpected. She was no longer afraid. These people who had once towered over her in memory had shrunk in reality. Their judgments, their glances, their whispered gossip, it held no power anymore. Her phone buzzed. "Eleanor, how's the armor holding up?" Lily looked around the room. Ashley, Jason, Jennifer. The same faces, now distant shadows. Lily, "I don't think I need it anymore." Eleanor, "Then it's doing its job perfectly." She turned to Julian and touched his arm gently. "Shall we dance?" He looked surprised, then pleased. "I'd love to." As they moved in sync to the soft rhythm of the music, she caught their reflection in the ballroom mirror. A poised woman behind a mask. A man who had once belonged to a different world. And yet, here they were, real in a way that felt entirely new. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For letting me stay hidden until I was ready not to be." His hand settled more firmly at her waist. "The night's not over yet." She smiled behind her mask, this time not out of defense, but anticipation. Later, seated at a long banquet table, Lily found herself beside Ashley Peters, who slid into the chair with practiced grace. "So," Ashley said, swirling her wine, "what's your secret?" "My secret?" Lily asked, setting her fork down gently. "How'd you manage to get Julian Whitaker to bring you?" Ashley leaned in, voice coated with curiosity and something sharper. "You know, half the women in this room have been eyeing him all night." Lily felt Julian shift slightly beside her, aware of the tension. She remained composed. "Maybe," she replied. "I asked better questions than the rest." Across the room, someone nearly choked on their drink. Ashley's smile faltered just for a moment. "You know," she continued, "your voice, it's oddly familiar. Did you go to Eastfield?" "She went to boarding school," Julian said smoothly, "in Switzerland." Ashley blinked. "Is that so? And you two still managed to meet at a medtech conference?" "How convenient." Lily straightened slightly in her seat. "Indeed," she said coolly, before Julian was called away. "Julian Whitaker." Tom's voice rang out. "We need you for the alumni achievement photo." He stood, brushing Lily's hand gently. "I'll be right back." The moment he left, Ashley turned, her facade slipping. "All right," she said, eyes narrowing. "Who are you, really?" Lily took a sip of water, letting the question hang in the air. Across the table, Ashley fiddled nervously with her hair. Lily watched the micro-expressions, tightness around the eyes, the anxious lift of the brow, the restless tapping of fingers. "Who are you trying to find behind that mask?" Lily wondered silently. "Me. Or yourself." But she didn't answer, not yet. "So, what kind of person did he usually go for?" Ashley's tone was light, but her eyes were sharp. "Well-liked, attractive," she added, her smile turning ever so slightly acidic. "Ordinary." The word lingered like static between them. But instead of shrinking beneath it, Lily felt something shift inside. Something neither bitter nor defensive. Something closer to pity. "Conformity," she said gently, "is a little dull, don't you think?" She tilted her head. "It seems, Ashley, you haven't changed much at all." Ashley's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. "Excuse me?" Before Lily could respond, Julian returned to the table, sensing the undercurrent. "Everything all right?" he asked, with a calm that didn't beg for truth. "Perfect," Lily replied, rising smoothly to her feet. Ashley, however, remained seated, still processing, her mind drifting back to hallways and locker doors and echoes from another life. "Wait, you can't be," she started, eyes widening. But Lily had already turned, linking her arm through Julian's. "Dance with me," she whispered. He pulled her gently onto the floor, his expression curious. "You okay?" She leaned in, resting her head lightly on his shoulder. "Better than okay," she murmured, watching Ashley whispering furiously to Jennifer Mills from across the ballroom. "They're starting to understand." "You want to leave?" Julian asked softly. She shook her head. "For the first time," she said, "I want to stay." From across the room, Ethan watched them dance, a quiet smile playing at the corners of his lips. His phone buzzed, confirmation from the hospital's donation portal. Another month, another contribution. He looked back at the couple on the dance floor, Julian completely captivated, and Lily, radiant beneath her mask. At that moment, Ethan thought, maybe redemption doesn't always come from confession. Sometimes it comes from giving someone else a chance to be seen. The music slowed, the notes melting into something softer. Lily's mask caught the light, casting glimmering shadows that danced across the marble floor like stars. Later that evening, near the women's lounge, Jennifer approached her. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice low. "Are you Lily?" Lily adjusted her mask slightly, her tone neutral. "What makes you ask?" "Because Ashley is convinced," Jennifer whispered. "And I'm starting to believe her." Lily glanced back at the ballroom. Julian stood in conversation, unaware. She looked at Jennifer again closely, the slight quiver in her hands, the doubt in her eyes. Would it matter, she asked. Jennifer hesitated. Don't know. Let's not talk about high school, Lily said quietly. I'm not here for apologies. Then why are you here? Jennifer asked, genuinely confused. Lily took a breath. To see something. What? That you're all just people, she said. Not monsters, not gods, just flawed human beings who once made cruel decisions. Jennifer recoiled slightly. We were kids. We didn't know any better. We were kids, Lily agreed, but now we're not. She turned to leave, but Jennifer caught her arm. I have a daughter, she said suddenly. Lily stopped. She's starting middle school next year. Jennifer's voice trembled. And I'm terrified that she'll be hurt the way we hurt others, or worse, that she'll be the one doing the hurting. Lily felt the tightness in her chest ease. What's her name? Lucy. Lily smiled softly behind the mask. Then you're already a better person than you were at 17. Jennifer blinked, tears welling at the corners of her eyes. How are you so calm about all of this? Lily lifted a hand, brushing her fingers across the edge of her mask. Because I've stopped hiding. Choosing who sees me, Lily thought, and how they see me. The doors of the grand ballroom swung open once more. Julian stepped in, exuding a quiet kind of elegance. Not flashy, not showy, but solid, present. All good here? He asked gently. All good, Lily replied, her voice honest. Jennifer was just telling me about her daughter. A flicker of understanding passed through Julian's expression. He held out his arm. Shall we? She looked at him, then back at Jennifer, at the questions in her eyes, the realization blooming slowly, delicately. I think I'm ready, Lily said softly, to start something new. Her hand lifted toward the ribbons of her mask. Are you sure? Julian asked, barely above a whisper. Lily gave a quiet nod. Some wounds, she said, need air to heal. With deliberate care, she untied the silver ribbons. The mask, Eleanor's masterpiece, slipped from her face, revealing everything. The braces, the glasses, the quiet courage in her eyes. Jennifer stared. Hi, Jen, Lily said with gentle steadiness. It's been a while. For a moment, time paused, and in that stillness, something real passed between them. Recognition, yes, but something closer to reverence. 3 days later, on a brisk Monday morning, Lily stood in the surgical prep room reviewing scans. Patient, Emily Crawford. Age 6. Facial fractures. Urgent case from last week. She hadn't thought twice about the last name. Dr. Park? A nurse called, poking her head in. The uncle's here to sign the consent forms. Lily nodded, still reviewing the CT scans. Send him in. She didn't look up until the voice reached her. Lily? She turned slowly. Julian stood in the doorway, looking very little like the composed CEO she was used to. His shirt slightly wrinkled, hair mussed, eyes tired. She's your niece? Lily asked quietly. He nodded, brushing a hand through his hair. This morning I found out you're her surgeon. She looked back at the scans. The injuries were complex, delicate bone work required. You didn't say anything. I didn't want to distract you, Julian replied. Didn't want you to feel any pressure. He stepped closer, eyes falling on the surgical imagery. I also just realized something else. This center, the one I donated to anonymously last year. Lily's eyes flicked up. You didn't know I worked here? He shook his head. Not until recently. The timing, the updates, the nameplate I walked past without thinking. She swallowed hard. The Crawford Pediatric Surgical Center. She passed it every day, never connecting it to him. I should prep for surgery, she said briskly, collecting her notes. The nurse will bring you the forms. But as she turned, he reached gently for her arm. Lily, wait. She paused. I meant what I said. This isn't about the ball or the coffee or dinners. It's not about making amends for the past. I've read your work, every paper, every breakthrough. I know your talent, and I trust you with everything that matters. Her eyes dropped briefly to his hand on her arm, then met his gaze again. I have to get this right, he added. You will, she said, her voice firm but soft. He let go. Thank you, he said, stepping back, for taking off the mask, for letting the world see you. As he left, Lily glanced once more at the scans. Then her phone buzzed. Eleanor, what does it feel like, warrior, to be seen? Lily lifted her hand to her cheek, no longer hidden, no longer guarded. Just a surgeon, focused and ready. She typed back, it feels right. Then she turned toward the operating room. Is that you, Uncle Julian? Emily's voice was soft, muffled by layers of gauze and bandages. Julian looked up from the laptop that had barely left his side in the 3 days since her surgery. Lily's operation had gone well, but healing, they'd been told, would take time. "You already look amazing to me," he said, easing into a chair beside her. "Honestly, I think the other kids might get jealous." "Why?" Emily asked. "Because you're braver than all of them put together." She smiled, tired but genuine. The moment lingered, quiet, gentle, until a soft knock broke the silence. Lily entered, tablet in hand, her white coat immaculate even at the late hour. "How's my favorite patient doing?" she asked, checking Emily's vitals. "She makes me feel calm," Emily whispered to Julian, as if letting him in on a secret. Lily smiled, adjusting her glasses. "I heard you've been talking about braces. Do you have them too?" Emily asked. "Absolutely. And believe it or not," Lily chuckled, "I got teased for them when I was younger too." "What did you do?" "I became a surgeon who helps kids feel confident in their own skin." Lily pulled up a chair beside her. "Sometimes the people who feel out of place," she added, "are the ones who grow up to build spaces where everyone belongs." Julian watched the exchange in silence. His niece, wide-eyed and hopeful, and the woman he once barely noticed in high school. And yet here they were, forming something powerful without trying. As Lily rose to leave, Emily called out, "Dr. Park." "Yes, sweetheart? Can you tell me more stories tomorrow about being different?" Lily paused, her smile softened. "Yes," she said. "I'd be honored." Later that evening, Julian found her in her office, carefully reviewing postoperative notes. "Thank you," he said simply. She glanced up. "For what?" "For showing my niece that being different isn't something to hide from." Lily set her pen down. "At the ball," she said, "when I took off the mask, it wasn't just for them. It was for me." Julian leaned in slightly. "And what did you see?" "The version of myself that was always enough," she replied, eyes steady. "I just needed the right audience to recognize it." "I see it now," he said. "All of it." "It's better to arrive late," she murmured, "than not at all." They stood in that silence, not in pretense, not in performance, just two people seeing each other clearly, perhaps for the first time. A week passed. Emily's recovery was progressing beautifully. "You don't have to do this," Julian said as Lily shuffled through a neat stack of folders on her desk. "Yes, I do." She held up an envelope. "The hospital board wants to schedule a meeting with their anonymous benefactor." Julian blinked. "The Crawford Pediatric Surgical Center needs to expand," she continued, straightening her coat. "And the man whose name is on the wall deserves to see what his generosity has built." Side by side, they walked the halls together. She introduced him to the staff, showed him the new equipment, pointed out the redesigned waiting area where nervous parents sat through the longest hours of their lives. Then she stopped in front of a wall. "This," she said, "is our gallery of brave expressions." Dozens of colorful self-portraits hung across the wall, drawn by children before and after their surgeries. Some were simple crayon sketches, others more detailed, but all of them radiated something deeply human. Julian stepped closer, his eyes landing on one. A girl with wild curly hair, big eyes, and a silver smile. "She drew that the night before her operation," Lily said quietly. "And this one," she pointed to another, "was done a month after." Julian didn't speak. He just stood there, eyes moving from picture to picture, the weight of it all settling gently on his shoulders. Not guilt, not duty, just understanding. Each drawing on the gallery wall had one thing in common. Every child, no matter the scar or surgery, had drawn themselves smiling. "Emily's will be up there soon," Lily said softly. "She's working on it now," Julian added, his voice filled with quiet pride. "I didn't know," he continued. "When I donated, I never imagined I was doing anything more than writing a check." Lily turned to face him, her expression warm. "You did more than help," she said. "You gave kids like me a new lens to see themselves through. A kinder one." Before Julian could respond, a nurse appeared with a handful of charts. Lily reviewed them with practiced ease, slipping into her focused rhythm. Julian watched her work, confident, composed, entirely in her element. Then a gentle voice broke the hum of the ward. "Dr. Park?" They turned to see Emily making her way down the hall, her mother supporting her gently. Her bandages were mostly gone now, revealing skin that was healing with remarkable grace. "Look," Emily beamed, holding up her recovery chart. "Just 2 more days, and these are gone for good." Lily crouched beside her. You're doing amazing, Emily. Just like we talked about, brave hearts heal best. Emily smiled, then turned to Julian. Uncle Julian? Are you visiting Dr. Park's special place too? Lily rose. Actually, she said, glancing at him, your uncle helped create this place. Emily's eyes widened. Really? Really? Julian said, kneeling beside her. But Dr. Park made it matter. Are you working together? Emily asked innocently. Lily and Julian shared a quiet look. We are, Lily said, as a team. As Emily left for her physical therapy session, they stood for a moment in the quiet corridor, watching the life flowing around them. You know, Julian said after a pause, most teams grab coffee together. Lily raised an eyebrow. Are you asking me out again? This time, he said, no rehearsals, no masks. She pretended to think. I suppose I could squeeze you in, Julian smiled. Still black coffee? Still black, she said, returning his grin. Some things never change. Meanwhile, back at Valley High, Ethan sat alone in his office, staring at a photo Lily had recently posted to the hospital's professional network. Emily, now bandage-free, beaming beside Dr. Park and her uncle, the once anonymous benefactor. From the doorway, Diana Chin asked quietly, a confession then? About what? Those monthly donations. Ethan slid his phone into his pocket. Not today. When? He stood, gathering his coat. Soon, but not today. Later that afternoon, Lily was wrapping up her rounds when Julian approached her in the hallway, holding 2 steaming cups. Still the same? He asked, handing her one. She took a sip, still flawless. Emily's ready for discharge, he said. That's why I'm here. She's inviting you to her welcome home party. Lily blinked. Is that you, Julian? Just like her doctor. I told her you could take your time deciding. Lily looked at him over the rim of her cup, quiet for a moment. What if I showed up? Not as her surgeon, but just as myself. Julian tilted his head. What do you mean? As someone who's finally done rehearsing, who's ready to live. He placed his cup beside hers on the counter. Then I think that moment's already here. From the nurse's station nearby, Ethan watched them in silence. His phone buzzed, another confirmation from the hospital's donation platform. Your monthly contribution has been processed. He smiled faintly, typed a short reply, and walked out without another word. Some truths, after all, don't need to be spoken out loud. Masks, Julian murmured, his voice low but steady, sometimes stay longer than we expect. He and Lily stood side by side in the hospital corridor, their coffee forgotten in their hands. Silence stretched comfortably between them as they gazed at the wall of hand-drawn portraits, each one a small testament to resilience. There in the center, Emily's latest addition, a smiling self-portrait. Her arms wrapped around 2 figures, her uncle and her surgeon. No masks, just light. Across town, Tom drove in silence, letting the quiet fill the spaces where words used to hurt. Funny, he thought, how the most meaningful stories often unfold when no one's trying to write them. The annual fundraiser for the Crawford Children's Surgical Center was alive with celebration. Conversations buzzed, laughter flowed. Light danced across polished floors and polished hearts. Lily stood at the podium, poised but heartfelt, addressing a room filled with benefactors, healthcare leaders and families whose lives had quietly been changed by this place. There was a time when this center was merely a sanctuary, she said, a place to rest, to recover. But today, it's become something more, a place of transformation. In the audience, Julian sat beside Emily, who clutched her science fair medal like a treasure. Her smile radiated pride. Next to them, Tom sat stiffly, his fingers tapping the armrest. We've been lucky, Lily continued. Blessed, really, with 2 anonymous donors. She looked toward Julian and offered a knowing smile. One made his presence known last year. Julian bowed his head slightly, eyes soft with quiet respect. But the other, Lily said, her tone now gentler, has remained in the shadows, month after month, quietly, steadily, giving. Tom held his breath. Today, she said, that donor came forward, a man who, like many of us, once believed he had to stay hidden. But healing, she added with warmth, can come in unexpected ways. Her eyes found Tom's, and often, from people who've been beside us all along. Tom stood slowly. The applause filled the room, warm and unfiltered. But he saw only Lily. And in her eyes, no judgment, only understanding, only peace. After the ceremony, the 3 of them gathered in Lily's office, Julian, Tom, and Lily. On her desk sat Eleanor's mask, no longer tied with ribbon but framed like artwork, no longer a shield, just a reminder. A decade of donations, Lily said quietly, glancing at Tom. Why didn't you tell me? It was never about me, he said simply. It was about making things right, in whatever way I could. Julian raised an eyebrow. That part at the podium, was that planned? Tom smirked. Some stories write themselves. Lily lifted the mask, its silver filigree catching the light like dew. Eleanor asked if she could display it, she said, as a symbol that some masks are never meant to stay. Julian tilted his head. And what did you say? I said yes, Lily replied, because I've moved on. She set the mask down one final time. Outside, the hospital pulsed with life. In the hallway, Emily's drawing still hung proudly, now surrounded by dozens of others. Together, they formed a mosaic of becoming, of children who once feared mirrors and now dared to draw themselves smiling. Every sketch, a story. Every line, a step forward. Julian turned toward Lily. Dinner later? She smiled, savoring her black coffee. Sounds perfect. As they exited the room together, Tom lingered behind. He pulled out his phone. The hospital's donation platform glowed on the screen. His finger hovered. Then, click. Reveal donor identity. Confirmed. He smiled faintly. Some masks, he realized, had served their purpose long ago. And now, it was time to lay them down. Thank you for walking this journey with us. Through every quiet moment, every unspoken fear, and every step toward healing, you've been here. Listening not just with your ears, but with your heart. This story wasn't just about masks or memories or second chances. It was about seeing ourselves and each other with more clarity, more compassion, and more courage than ever before. If it stirred something within you, if it reminded you of your own path, then know that you are never alone in it. From all of us at Shining Stories, thank you for letting us be a small part of your day, and perhaps a gentle part of your healing too. Until next time.